Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome back to the first live session of 2021. So happy new year and thanks for joining me. So today we've got a few things to get through. I'm going to give you a brief reminder about our competition in a second. Then we're going to edit this photo from Russell Ord out in Australia. So this is a great shot to edit because it covers quite a few different techniques. So we're going to go from the original to something closer to this. So just hide me for a second so you can see what's going on. Bit more light, bit more airy, and so on. So that's what we're going to edit today. Before we get to that, as I said, I wanted to give you a quick reminder about our competition, which is called Capture Colors. So I'm just going to bring up on screen a little bit of information about it. So this is going to be running up until January 16th. So you don't have much time to get your entries in, because what are we at now? The 7th. So that gives you another 4 days to get moving. And why should you enter? Because there are some nice prizes up for grabs courtesy of Fuji. And what do you have to do? So basically create a photo under the theme of red with the hashtag Capture One Colors or tag Capture One Pro, stick it up on Instagram, and then we'll be picking some lucky winners to win one of these three cameras. So that's an XT200, an XT30, and if I peek at the top, that's an XF10. So well worth entering to win one of those. Full details across our social media, of course. So you've only got until January the 16th and then it closes. So get your entries in quick. All right, back to Capture One. And when we finish this edit, I'm going to give you a reminder about all the live sessions that are coming up in January. Because if you're like me, you are now well and truly stuck at home again without the ability to go anywhere because of our dear friend Corona. So there's lots of content coming out live throughout January. So when we finished our edit here, I'll let you know exactly what's coming, how you can join, and so on and so forth. Do keep your questions coming in. I shall do my best to answer them. So, looking over at Capture One, this is the edit I was just playing around with yesterday. We'll probably get something close to that, but probably not identical. So this was shot, as I said, by Russell Ord out in Australia. It is on a Fuji GFX 100, as you can see here. So plenty of pixels to play with. What we're going to do is layer up a few different adjustments, fix some of the variation in skin tone, use a curve, do a few other things. So before that, I'm just going to throw in a crop. So let's just grab our crop tool and we're just going to come in a little bit tighter like so. I'm not cropping to any particular format. If you do want to crop to certain aspect ratio, you can do a quick right click here and that will bring up the most common or popular aspect ratios. Of course, you can also add your own. So a right click is a speedy way to get to that, as opposed to having to navigate back up to the crop tool up here. So that looks a bit better. Going to hit H on my keyboard. Of course, we don't have to apply the cropping Capture One. That just means we're going to see the photo as it is cropped. So before anything else, and we get into our layers, we can see that it's a tiny bit underexposed, but it's not too bad. I'll lift it a little bit with exposure, but I'm conscious that we've got relatively high key lighting at the back. If you look at our histogram over here, wherever I hover my cursor on the screen, you can see that orange bar just peaking there. So I don't want to go too bright, but I might like to brighten up her a little bit more as well. So I'm going to put the brakes on the exposure there, go to my levels tool, and it's not always 100% necessary, but what I'm going to do is hit auto here, and that will just set my levels, so it will move the endpoints in, and that will just give us a better base contrast to start with. And now we've got a nice even spread of tones, always from shadows to highlights. So that's given us a good start. Now we could stop there if we wanted to. That's if we just throw on before and after. That's kind of an immeasurable improvement, just really from tweaking the exposure and doing the levels, and not very much else. But let's do a few other fixes as well. Now, I'm quite happy with the overall skin tone, the colors. You know, it's a nice color palette. I don't want this to get too saturated. in the background, you know, everything color-wise is looking pretty nice out of camera. I do want a bit of extra contrast, but what I'm going to do is use a linear curve just to keep the colors nice and stable. So if we go to our curve tool down here, where we will find our curves, we've got RGB, Luma, red, green and blue, so the separate channels. Difference between RGB and Luma is that if we play with an RGB curve, let's just whack in a quick contrast curve. I'll do it a little bit more aggressively than I was going to intend to. Then the colors are also going to shift as well. Saturation will go up. You see just under here, under her chin, we've got a bit more saturation and so on. So that's just always a consequence of using an RGB curve. So I'm going to reset that and we're going to go to Luma because I want to add a little bit of contrast, but nothing too drastic. And I want the colors to stay nice and stable. So makes sense to use the Luma curve. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lift up the midtones. So the midtones is going to be her skin. Just pull the shadows down a little bit and just a gentle S-curve like so. Nothing super drastic, just a little bit more contrast. Good question from Jim and Hamed on this subject. So Jim says, on auto levels, I think it applies too much for my taste. So I back them down by half, especially the blacks. If you want to automate that, Jim, if you haven't discovered that, under preferences in exposure, I believe. So you've got your auto levels clipping threshold. So if you increase that number, so it's at 0.1, so the more you increase that number, the more it's going to space away from the edges. So it will be less critical, if you like. So you can always do that if you need to. And the other question from Hamed, what effects does auto levels will give me if I set it to Luma versus RGB in the preference menu? So what Hamed's talking about here under preferences is this RGB channel or red, green and blue channel. The default is RGB channel, and that will simply mean that it will adjust the red, green and blue to exactly the same levels. So it will just snap in the shadows and highlights as I mentioned earlier. Now, if you've got some haziness or an overall color cast, if there's a more dominant channel, then what that auto will do will set the shadows and highlights for each color channel. So that might help you remove some color casts and so on. It's a little bit out of scope for today, but I remember that for the future. Generally, you're okay on RGB. But if you do have a dominant color channel, like there's a bunch of blue somewhere or whatever, then it might help to even out the colors a bit better as well. Okay, so let's just pull up her midtones a little bit more, and I'm happy with that. If we just go to our high dynamic range, not much to do here really. I might just open up the shadows a touch and then just pull the blacks down a little bit as well. So that gives us a nice base setting. Okay, so I want to do a tiny bit of skin work, not retouching because it doesn't make, you know, sense to for someone like me to give us like perfect porcelain skin and so on. So we're not about doing ridiculous skin retouching here today, but there is some variation in skin tone because if we look kind of around the neck, it's kind of warmer there. If we go down to around here, it gets a little bit more magenta and so on. So what's an easy way to fix that? Fortunately, in the color editor tool down here we have a tab called skin tone, which is completely devoted to that. Let's fly it out actually so we can see a little bit easier what's going on. Go away tooltip. You'll see at the bottom section of this tool we've got 3 sliders called Uniformity, and basically these help to pull the skin tones to a target of your choice. So if you like a skin tone here, for example, you can make all the other skin tones fall into line. It's very simple to use. I find generally you're going to get a better level of accuracy if you do it on a layer, because working on a layer just means if there's any similar tones that are close to skin and you don't want those to be affected, then it's much better if you actually place it on a layer as opposed to trying to do it over the whole shot. So how would we do this on a layer? Well, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. Let's just do, for this shot, we're going to do the quick and dirty technique. So let's make a new layer and we're going to call this skin tone. like so. We're going to grab our brush. You can right click to see your brush settings, or you can use the new nifty shortcuts that were in 21. So if you want to adjust on the fly without having to go into that tool menu, if you hold Control and Option down together, then if I drag left and right, you can see the size. If I go up and down, you can see the hardness, like so. But for you guys, what I generally tend to do is show you the tool palette, because that's a little bit easier to see what's going on rather than, you know, a heads up display. So for your learning, generally I'll do it like this. If I'm doing quick edits, then I'm going to use the shortcuts. Okay, so we've got max opacity and flow, as you can see down here. So I'm just going to do a quick mask around here. It doesn't have to be super accurate because it's not like there's a lot going on in the background, which is kind of a similar skin tone. So we're going to do a little bit like that. Going to zoom in slightly over here. And really the skin tone on her face is pretty damn good actually, so I'm not going to really change anything there. So let's press M to hide our mask, and then we're going to grab our color picker in the skin tone tool. Let's bring this out so we can see what's going on. We're going to grab the color picker and we're going to click on our desirable skin tone. So I'm going to go probably somewhere up here like so. I'm going to expand this out to make sure we're capturing all the kind of skin tones that we want to correct. Then essentially what happens when you drag those sliders across hue, saturation and lightness, anything in that range, in that triangle, will get transformed to that pick point, which is indicated by that dot. So if I drag hue all the way across, saturation and lightness, you can see what's happening there, then the skin tone evens out. Now of course we want some nuance and a bit of, you know, general human variance going on. So I probably wouldn't pull it all the way to 100%. I might just back it off a little bit, just so we have some variance, but it goes forward to some correction. Let's put the color editor tool away. If we turn off the skin tone tool, so let's turn that off, you can see before and after, it just takes that kind of additional warmth away there. And that's super easy to do. Any of you can do that in Capture One. Doesn't have to be a super accurate mask, don't have to spend a lot of time doing it, and you end up with nice even skin tones. So if we look over on the arms, actually, see what it did there, just took a little bit of the redness out, and over here as well, just to kind of give us a bit more uniformity. Cool, so there we go. All right, what do we want to do next? One thing that slightly bothers me about this photo is that when you look at it, we've got quite a nice catch light in her right eye, her right. And then if we look over on her left eye, we can see that the catch light, it's just slightly darker. I mean, of course, it's outdoors, so we can't control that. But what I think I can do, or which seemed to work all right yesterday, we'll see how it goes today, is just to borrow the catch light from that eye just to brighten that one up a bit, because otherwise she looks a bit one-eyed in that respect. So let's just hide our browser, Command B. So we're going to make a new clone layer because we just want to copy this bit across. We're going to call this eye lights, like so. Grab our clone stamp or a clone brush here, and with the clone brush we have to set the source, so we have to tell Capture One where we want to borrow some pixels from. Now I don't want this part of her eye, so I'm going to make this brush nice and small like so. So we just want to steal this bit of it like so, and I'm going to pull down the flow a little bit so we can build it up gradually. What flow is doing, if you remember, is that every pass of the brush, whether it's a pen or a mouse, forgot my brain for a second then every pass of the pen or the mouse will gradually build up that adjustment. So by keeping the flow low, we can do a few passes until it's the right density, because we don't want to then end up with that one being too bright and so on. So let's option click. So if we option click, that's going to be our source point. And then I just want to grab and just brush in a little bit over here and stop when I think it's about right. So that's pretty good density, maybe a little bit more. So a couple more brushes and then we're good to go. So if I press H on my keyboard, that gives me my hand tool back. There we go, that's just a little bit brighter. So if we go into 50% and turn off eye light, so you can see before and after, like so. So it just, you know, evens it up a little bit. Michael says, all of these tutorials can be sold as lessons, but Caption gives it away for free. Well, you know, you've bought the software, so it's technically not free, and of course you're very welcome, and I don't think that's something we would want to look to, is charging for you these kinds of things. All right. Now that we've zoomed in a little bit, I can spot something else that looks like 100 megapixels, no mercy. Looks like it's probably a grain of sand or something like that. So if I grab my healing brush, the little sticking plaster, don't have to bother making a layer, because as soon as let's just make this a bit smaller, and I would use the shortcut in this case. If you want to see the shortcut, I don't know if is overhead cam on. Yes, it is. So, sorry, my keyboard's just sneaking out in the corner. So if we use Control Option, these two, and drag left and right, so drag left, drag right, then we can make our brush bigger and smaller, like so. So it's very handy when you're healing, because you can move a little bit faster. If you do Shift Control Option, then that will also give us our opacity and flow on those two axes, as you can see. It's slightly different for PC. If you just check out the support site, then it will list the Mac shortcuts and the PC shortcuts, because it's a little bit different on a PC. If you're a Photoshop user, it's identical to that, so there's no additional learning. So let's get rid of this little whatever it is. So I'm just going to draw over that. Capture One will pick me a source point, and then I'm happy with that. So it's just ever so slightly distracting. All right, let's get rid of overhead cam. Hopefully that wasn't hiding what I was doing, was it? Oh, it might have been. Sorry if it was, if that was in the way, but literally just a case of grabbing your healing brush and going over it. But there isn't really much else to heal on here. It's got pretty good skin, really. I mean, if we want to see another one, we can just do a click mark like so. And then for speedy adjustment, for changing your brush size, use the shortcut, and then simples. All right, I think we're nearly there, to be honest. The only thing I might do is just always at the end of an edit, it's nice to review what you've done. So if we just look at before and after, so that's how it started out of camera, that's where we are now, just a bit brighter in area. I might push it a little bit more with our curve, just in the midtones. So just bring that up a bit brighter still. All the highlights are fine. If we turn on our exposure warnings, there's a warning showing there, but I have them to come on quite early. So if we look at the numbers, then nothing is hitting 255, so that's fine. Do I want a vignette? I don't know. I've got a feeling it, don't know, maybe. Let's just do a tiny vignette. I don't think it really needs it, to be honest. So I think that pretty much finishes. The only other thing I might do, let's do this. I'm going to make a new field adjustment layer. I just want to lighten these areas under our eyes a bit. Now the reason why I've filled this, so it's a filled layer, so if I press M on my keyboard, so M for the mask, just down here, if I tap that, we can see the mask coming on and off. The reason why I've filled it is so we can visualize the adjustment, what's going on. So again, I probably will just use a Luma Curve. So if I hover over these darker areas, we can see it sitting down here somewhere. So if I just lift that area up a bit, and yes, it's going to affect everything else, but I'm not too bothered about that. So now that's going to give a little bit of brightness correction down there. That's fine. So the purpose of filling that mask again is so we could see what was going on. Now I'm going to right click and say clear mask, grab my brush like so, and I'm going to make this smaller and softer and with a very, very low flow. So we've got relatively small, but more importantly, super soft and a nice low flow, even down as far as 1 to something like that. So just to keep it very light. And then what we can do is just brush back and forward, and then gradually that's going to paint in our curve adjustment just to lift this area a tiny bit. So it's just dodging out a little bit of density, not much, but just a touch. So now if we turn this off, then you can see before and after like so. And if it's too much and we can back our opacity down and just get it to the level that looks natural and, you know, works for us. How can I customize my Wacom? The shortcut that David's using doesn't work in my Capture-One 21. It was nothing to do with the Wacom. Just make sure you're not pressing the button as well. It's basically a drag, so it works on a mouse as well as a Wacom. So if I just put this camera on again, all I'm doing is holding down, so Control Option, and then click drag left and right. So if we grab a brush back up a second, Control Option, so you can see the brush down here. Then if I click right, so you can't see my hand moving much because of the sensitivity, but if I exaggerate, I'm essentially doing this. So just make sure you've got the correct shortcut keys going on your setup. So there's nothing you have to customize on the Wacom. It's literally just, I'm not touching any of the pen buttons. It's just drag left and right like so. Same goes if you're using a mouse, click drag left and right, and then Shift Control Option to do opacity and flow. If you're on a PC, then you need to use right click as well. But as I said, on support.capture1.com, then all the various different shortcuts are listed. All right, okay, let's get that out of the way so we're not hiding anything else, and let's just have a look at the final edit. I think that's where I would stop with this shot. So if we look at the layers, we've got our skin tone adjustment. Let's just zoom in a little bit so we can see what's going on. So skin tone off, so you can see it's warmer underneath. Skin tone adjustment on, nicely corrected. Eye light, just to steal that little tiny catch light in the eye, just to even her up. And then a very small heel layer just to get rid of our grain of sand or whatever it is. I said GFX 100 doesn't really take any show any mercy. And then the final adjustment layer just to lighten up just those areas underneath the eyes like so. And we could push that more. We could use that same layer elsewhere if we wanted to lighten anything else up, but I'm pretty happy with how it looks. If we click on before and after, we can see as it came out of camera and as it is now. Miguel says, could we fix the yellows on the hair? Yeah, you could do with just a click on the color editor, but to be honest, that's probably part of a hair color anyway. But you could just choose that color on a mask, reduce the saturation, tweak the hue, or something like that would probably work quite nicely as well. All right, now somebody at the start before I went actually on live on the system here asked about, please can there be more live sessions going on in January, because we're all stuck at home again, depending where you are in the world. So yes, there is going to be lots more stuff coming up. So bringing it up on screen right now. 12th of January, that's going to be next week. And let's just pause this because otherwise it's going to go ahead of me. So 12th of January, that's next Tuesday. Emily, who is a photographer and friend of the house, she looks after our community, Capture-One Creative Lab on Facebook. So she's a photographer based out of Brooklyn in New York, and she's going to come on and edit one of our shots. 2 days later, on the 14th of January, we have a full-on webinar, which you can sign up at learn.capture1.com, and you'll see those webinars pinned at the top of the page. So learn.capture1.com, or you can join on YouTube and Facebook, whatever you prefer. That's going to be about the color editor, working with layers and color and all kinds of other, basically anything relating to color. The whole smorgasbord on color editing. The session with Emily is going to be 30 minutes and then a longer one for talking about color. 19th of January, that's the Tuesday, I think. It's going to be with Zoe. She's a photographer based out of Berlin. She's a whiz at color grading, so she's going to join me and edit one of her shots. And then that kind of carries on from the color webinar, so we can talk more in detail about color grading. Then on the Thursday, get the most out of layers. So that will be longer, 60-minute session as opposed to 30 minutes, where we're talking, you saw a little bit today, of course, about layers, but if you've never used layers before, I appreciate that might be a bit overwhelming if you've never drawn a mask, don't appreciate exactly how it works and so on. So that will be all about how to work with layers. And then finally on the 28th of January, it's going to be batch editing tips. So that will be anything from the import side of things to working in Capture One to export. What can you do to speed up working through Capture One? So that's what's going to be coming up. Last couple of questions. Pre-show says, what tablet was stylish to use for working on Capture One? This is a rather beaten up Wacom Intuos Pro Medium, I believe it is, but to be honest, it doesn't have to be the Pro version. Even the base models work great with Capture One. The benefit of the Pro models is they have greater levels of sensitivity, but if you're not illustrating or using the pressure sensitivity in Photoshop as an example, or Affinity Photo, then save some money and buy the cheaper versions. The Pro also have the shortcut buttons down the side, but I tend to work like this. You can just see where my keyboard is, which I find slightly more ergonomic than twisting this shoulder back down to these keys, and I know where all my shortcut keys are. So any Wacom tablet works pretty nicely, I will be honest. Alrighty, I'm just looking on Facebook for any questions. I see my colleagues are doing a grand job about answering everything, so I think we're pretty well covered. Great. All right, and again, if you want to be notified when we go online, of course, don't forget to like the Facebook page. I can press my button here for subscribe. If you subscribe on YouTube, and there's a little bell next to that, if you click that, then you get a notification when we're live. It gives you a 30-minute warning, I believe, and a 10-minute warning as well when we actually go live. So that's a good way not to miss anything as well. All right, thanks for joining us today. Hope to see you next Tuesday with me and Emily. If you've forgotten those dates, don't worry, just keep an eye on Facebook events because we list everything there as well. And they're already all queued up on YouTube as well. So if you just go to our YouTube page and scroll down a bit to the playlist, live sessions, then you'll see them all queued up there as well. So just remind me, and then you won't miss a thing when you are sat at home like me. So thanks for joining again today. Hope to see you all next week and throughout the rest of January. And don't forget to get your competition entries in to be in the chance to win one of those 3 cameras. So take care, everyone, and see you soon. Bye now.